So we're here, Midtown Manhattan, waiting to go to the secret entrance. Actually, this is where I thought it might be, the Directors Guild. So we're here to see David Icke's new movie. And David Icke was banned from a similar event in Los Angeles just the other day. So he's waited until the very last moment to announce the location. And let me see, what I'm going to do is I'll stop recording before I go in, and we'll see how they feel about me recording inside the event. But David Icke's movie premiering here in New York at the Directors Guild of America. Nice theater they have here on 57th Street. So we'll see what's going on inside. We're at the really lovely Directors Guild of America Theater, and they've just started letting people in. So it looks like tonight's event is a go. With any luck, we'll be able to speak to David Icke after the show. I will not, of course, be recording the movie, but this is a new movie. This is a life story of David Icke called Renegade. And if anybody is not familiar with David Icke, it's a very appropriate title. Should be an interesting film. All right, so there we go. David Icke has arrived.
You get the thing in the background, eh? What do you think? Hello, everybody.
Hey, David.
How are you?
Everybody lining up to meet David Icke.
I won't give them the satisfaction of being ill. Hello, darling. Give us a cuddle. Yes, please.
So everybody's very excited to be here at the Directors Guild of America Theater in New York to meet David Icke just before the premiere of Renegade, the life story of David Icke. He appears to be in very good spirits.
Land of the free, you have to do that.
Meeting everybody, shaking hands with all the people who've come out to see the film. David's always a very friendly guy.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
David, how are you?
Blimey.
Good to see you again.
That looks
Jason
serious,
Goodman.
that.
Can I use our selfie time to ask you just a few quick questions about what happened in Los Angeles?
They cancelled the premiere 2 hours before start.
Who was the they? Was it authorities?
The people that own the venue.
Huh. Why would they do that?
But how far that goes back out from them, who knows?
Exactly. Well, we're here tonight at the Directors Guild of America Theater in New York. Welcome to New York.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you on the home court.
And it's going ahead, which is Pew.
That's right. Well, we'll see the film and I'll talk to you afterwards.
All right, mate.
Lovely to see
nice
you again.
Nice to meet you. See you. Bye.
All right, there we go. David Icke just letting us know what happened in L.A. Luckily, did not happen again here in New York. So I'm going to take my seat and get ready for the premiere.
People say I talk about some weird stuff, some far out stuff. But how about that chair that you're sitting in isn't solid? How weird is that? This reality is nothing like we think it is.
My next guest is David Icke. He describes himself as a full-time investigative journalist searching for the truth of what's really going on in the world. David, good morning.
Morning, Ryan. I set out on a world speaking tour in the summer of 2016 because I could feel that more and more people were starting to feel uneasy about the world.
You realize that there is a whole awakening movement around the world.
At least he's giving truths out there that plant a seed.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you welcome on stage David Icke? Thank you. Thank you. Whoa. Thank you. Thank you.
If I have to be stopped.
To stop you telling lies.
It's becoming more and more of a challenge to find places to speak without it being cancelled. My website is blocked in schools and universities and colleges. The system is desperate to silence what I'm putting out. Why?
They're laughing at you. They're not laughing with you.
We were ridiculed beyond belief. Press camped outside the house. follow this on holidays.
Yes, I know people put a lot of work into conspiracy theories, but I still think they're actually intellectually lazy.
Have you read any of my books?
No.
How do you know that it's intellectually lazy? If I had not let go of this concern what other people think, does anybody think I would have talked and written about some of the things I have since? No way!
When I saw what Ike is doing, like, I was a bit jealous on him. Like, wow, look at what this guy's doing.
I love his mind. I don't know if anybody else could do it but him, actually.
We are in a period now where speaking your truth is not just important, it's utterly crucial to where humanity goes from here.
I mean, what kind of world are those kids going to live in if we go on as we are, but we're not going to? Much as that will distress those that wish it to happen. Good.
The world needs renegades, and it needs them now.
So David's going to come down and we're going to do just a little Q&A if you guys would like. Does that sound good?
Yeah!
I want to just recognize one other person that came in a little late. Tyler, stand up, please. Tyler's with us. He did all the motion graphics and sound. It's the third movie we've done with Tyler, and he actually flew in from Seoul, South Korea to be here tonight. So it's really cool. David Icke, where are you, sir?
You're in the bathroom.
Oh, okay. All right, so I'll say a word or two while we're waiting on him, because I think most of your questions are going to be for him, not for me. So it was an interesting story that happened almost exactly 2 years ago when we had the Manchester show last week. You know, Facebook will do these little things that say on this day, however many years ago this happened. And it told me that I was at another premiere in LA for a film that I did called Unacknowledged. I don't know if anybody has seen that. And it was an amazing film that talked about, are we alone in the universe, and is there a government cover-up about it? And after the film was over, we had a little after thing, and this young couple came up to me, and the girl had tears in her eyes. I was like, oh my Lord, what in the world is this going to be all about? And she said, I just want to thank you for making this movie. And I was like, no problem. She was like, no, you don't understand. All of my friends think I'm insane. Who's had that before? Anyone in this room? Absolutely. And she said, and for the first time, I now have a tool to sit them down and say, just watch this with an open mind for 90 minutes, and then we can have a conversation. And so what we wanted to do in making this movie is to give you guys this tool to be able to share. And most of you guys know David is so misunderstood, and he's so vilified in the mainstream media. And so we wanted to tell a story of a guy who's gone against all odds for something he's incredibly passionate, something that he believes in. And I think that's incredible. I think it's incredible. And that's the story that we want people to see and to know about. And so that's why we made this movie. And we made it for you guys to be able to share. So thank you so much for coming. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Come on up, buddy. So this is the first film that David has ever done.
To get this information out to people who wouldn't read a book, who wouldn't come to an event, and listen for 4 hours or whatever, but might watch a movie for an hour and 40 minutes, I think it is, Stephen. And so that's the idea. And I've been painted and demonized in the mainstream media. And one of the problems that they have with this movie is the movie kind of shows me in another light that is very different to the one that is portrayed by the media. So I can understand why they want to shut it down and stop people seeing it. But it comes out on June the 4th, and the more people see it, the more people talk about it and get other people to see it, then we've got a chance of moving on and introducing new people to this information. Because the information itself is so powerful, and I see this all the time, it makes sense of the world to people. And the only thing that is preventing people seeing the world from another perspective, where I know from my experience, they go, my God, this makes so much sense, much more sense than what else I've been told. What's stopping that is people having the information put in front of them. That is why we are facing now an extraordinary war on freedom of speech and freedom of expression, because they're terrified of information that that will get people to see beyond the official narrative and all the nonsense and all the lies. They're desperate to stop that. And so we're seeing, I mean, I don't know whether you've seen the story today, where people like Alex Jones and others have been banned from Facebook.
I was
not only
banned
that,
today.
they're saying that anyone that links to their information, even if someone has nothing to do with them, they'll also be banned. So we are heading into this period of Orwell's non-people, non-person, where people just disappear because they have no access to the public arena. You know, people have said so many times over the last 30 years that what I'm saying is nonsense, and yet it just keeps somehow happening, and often it's the people. It's like I got banned from Australia, and I'm saying that very few people control Australia, and that Australia is not a free society, it's the illusion of a free society. And they're saying, whoa, no, that's rubbish, that is. You know what we're going to do? Talking that rubbish, we're going to ban you. So it's like the people that say you're wrong are the ones that prove you're bloody right. They seem to have no self-awareness that that's what's happening. But when you look at the fact that I was describing the world as it's unfolding today, back in the 1990s, I point that out not to people, not to say, look how clever I am, I knew this was going to happen, but for this reason. If I knew about it in the 1990s, it's not random, is it? It's not happening by random chance. It's happening by cold, calculated design. And if it's happening by design, it means there's some force that's behind the design. So what is that force? And you go deeper and deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, and the whole panorama opens up, and you realize that this world is absolutely nothing like we thought it was and have been told it was. And now we're at this cusp where more and more people are starting to realize that. At the same time, the system itself is trying to defend itself from that awakening by censoring information on an ever more blatant and extreme way. But it's funny. Well, it's not funny, but it's funny in kind of that kind of weird funny that this lockdown of information, like the ban on the film premiere in Los Angeles, is only possible because the slaves play their part. So you have rank and file people at venues who make the decision to ban you, when actually that which is behind it all has them in its gun sights as well, and their kids and grandkids in their gun sights. It has their freedom in its gun sights, but it's the artisans, the people who are the venue managers and the people who are just part of the regular society who are making the decisions to serve the interests of that force, which, like I say, wants to enslave them and their families as much as anyone else. And we have to just break this acquiescence to authority so that the artisans stop playing a part in their own enslavement, that refuse to play a part in banning someone, instead of just taking orders. Because what happened in Los Angeles has happened again and again and again. They'll take a booking. This is the regular people that run the venue. And then closer to the event, the upper levels of management will realize this guy is coming. And they'll say to the management, which clearly happened with this theater in Los Angeles, what the hell are you doing allowing this guy to come? And then what they do is they say, he hoodwinked us, we didn't realize it was him. And this is what was happening in this week with the Los Angeles event. These people were screaming down the phone at Stephen, saying, how could you do this to us? Basically, how could you try to get this man's film in our theatre without us realizing? Well, of course, they realized from the start. And it's this hierarchy where those that actually, rubber stamp, if you like, or carry out things like banning, acquiesce to the upper levels of the system, and that allows the few to dictate down this hierarchy, to have the will of the few imposed. If people just refused to do it and did things on the basis of whether they believed it was right, instead of whether some hierarchy told them to do it, then that power structure starts to unravel, because the few can only control the many by the acquiescence of the many. When that stops, the power structure falls. And we absolutely need now people to start doing what they believe and what they know to be right, rather than think of consequences in the short term. Because you can think of consequences as an immediate consequence. What is going to happen if I do this? But if you play the longer game and you think, what are the consequences of me not doing this? You realize the consequences of not doing it are far greater than the potential consequences of doing it. Because we're now going down a road where the consequences are the end of human freedom, the inability for anyone to hear or see anything that the authorities don't agree they should see and hear, and through this AI, a situation where artificial intelligence becomes the human mind and becomes human thought, passes for it, and becomes human perception. So this is what the longer consequences are, and they're phenomenal. And they can only happen if people turn their heads and their eyes away from that consequence. If you think it's bad now, it's going to be like for the kids and grandkids. And start seeing that consequence rather than the short-term consequence of, if I do this, what will happen to me now? We have to start having the courage to do what we know to be right, based on knowledge of what will happen if we don't. And if enough people do that, then the whole power structure falls, because it depends on acquiescence. When you see organizations, be it the police, be it the government, be it, any organization, the number of positions you have to control the entirety of the organization is tiny. Think of the police. All you have to do is control those positions in the police that decide if there's a prosecution or if there's not, if there's an investigation or if there's not, and those levels, which are basically the same, that can hire and fire who they choose to hire and fire. just the few positions within the police that control those two things will dictate the entirety of the police force. Because the police, the rank and file, are taking orders from that level, that few. And if that says you're not investigating this, they don't investigate it. If they say, no, although it's not justified, you are going to investigate and prosecute this guy, who we want to target, then they do, then the police is controlled by a tiny few people. But if police officers, again, took the long-term consequence instead of the short-term and said, no, I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. I'm not prosecuting this guy who doesn't deserve to be prosecuted. And I'm not gonna stop pursuing this person who I know should be. Then that you start to, and if enough people do it, you start to break down this hierarchy of power where the few are dictating to the many. But if you don't, if you just take orders and you're worried about immediate consequence, then you're handing power to these tiny few positions that are dictating through the system. And if you take the system in its entirety, the number of people who are dictating the lives of 7.7 billion is laughable. It's laughable. And if we take our power back and refuse to take it anymore, then it's not that the tail is currently wagging the dog. The tail is currently wagging the elephant. And we need to start reversing that power structure through ceasing to acquiesce and cooperate with it, whereby the power dynamic will dramatically change. Because unless the many acquiesce to the few have no power whatsoever. Their power is the power we give them. And that has to change, because if it doesn't, what's that great line? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. We have to break that pattern, we have to break that, and we break it by ceasing to acquiesce, ceasing to think of short-term consequences, and keep our minds on the long-term consequences of this going on to where it's currently going.
Okay, so we're going to try to take a couple of questions, and David's going to try his absolute...
I've got a microphone. We can go out there. Is somebody going to hand
You may be able to hear, just if you guys shout it out.
We might be able to hear, yeah.
David's going to try his very hardest, because it's going to be very difficult to be brief. Jamie always says, we've got an hour for Q&A. That should be about 2 questions.
Yeah, I've got verbal diarrhea. I've tried the acupuncture and everything. I just won't bloody shift it. Oh, thanks, buddy.
Who's got a question for us? Yeah, right here, buddy.
Thanks, David. Question for you. I've been reading your books, and it's really helped me to evolve my perception, to get outside of my 5 physical senses. I keep coming to the same question over and over again, and that it's troubling me. And I've driven literally from Michigan. I got up this morning at 6 a.m. to come here to just actually ask
He's driven from Michigan to ask me a question. I mean, I'm not under pressure.
Are we, when you just saw Joe Rogan and Elon Musk discussing what we're in a matrix right now, like, who is controlling this reality that we're in right now that is enslaving my 5 physical senses from the true being that I'm, this transcendent, unlimited awareness? Like, what's happening right now?
Well, this goes deep in the rabbit hole, and this goes into areas that, of course, I've had great ridicule for, but I couldn't give a shit. That's totally What has happened over the last 30 years is that I have come across information, and what I do, how I work, is if I come across something new, the key thing is not to dismiss it. And not just to start putting it out there saying, you know, this is how it is, because hold on a minute, how do you know? So I put things on the back burner and I wait. And if more information comes with that subject, there eventually comes a point where it crosses my line and I think, well, there is so much to support this, I'm sure this is what's going on. And sometimes information won't, and in that sense, that information subject will not go anywhere, but mostly it does. And so over the years, my kind of life since the Betty Shine experience in 1990, it's basically gone in sections, and once one section is moving, then something else will come in, and then they'll all start moving concurrently, which is what they do now. This great spectrum of information different things are coming to me all the time. It started out in the early 1990s after that Betty Shine experience, where information was coming to me, what you might call 5 sense information, about how a few people control the world, and then the whole bloodline thing came in. There's interbreeding bloodlines involved here, all the secret society stuff. And then from about the mid-90s, because my next question was, well, when did this bloody start? Because what I was looking at was very clearly an agenda going through the generations, moving the world into an obvious direction. So what was the common theme? Because people were being born and they were dying, they were being born and they were dying, and in that period in between we call a human life, they were pushing this agenda on. So there had to be a common factor that spanned these generations, that was, if you like, the cement, the controlling force as this process was coming in through the generations. And from the mid-1990s, and what would happen, and what still happens, is a new subject will come into my life, and then suddenly I'm getting information about that subject from all angles. And so eventually, from about the mid-1990s, maybe about 96, information started coming that actually there is a force which is not human, which can take form, but in its base state is a very imbalanced state of awareness, a very imbalanced state of consciousness, because in the end everything's consciousness. And you can have balanced consciousness and you can have imbalanced consciousness, which manifests in our reality as psychopathic behavior, etc. So there was a non-human element to this, that was this force that was actually the common theme while all this is going on, and in our world, people through the generations pushing this on. And what I found very compelling was that I started to meet with, if you like, whistleblowers who were describing this to me in the United States and other places. And then I was looking at ancient societies, ancient texts, ancient beliefs, and in the streams of cultural knowledge passed on through the shamanistic streams in various cultures. And what I was seeing was the same phenomenon that was being told to me by whistleblowers in the modern world. And that basic theme was that there was a hijack of human society by this non-human force, which in different cultures is given different names, which makes a lot of people think they're talking about different phenomena. They aren't. You look at how these different names for this force are described. They're basically describing the same force very clearly. So there is this this level of it, where there's this non-human level of it, and then from around the turn of the millennium, the whole subject of the nature of reality came in, and I started to experience and get more and more knowledge about that. And these two then started to connect, which brings us to the question about this reality and who controls it. Well, see, if this force could just take over, it bloody well would. But it can't. It has to manipulate us to build our own prison, described in the movie, and at greater length in the books. It has to get us to enslave ourselves, because it can't do it. One of the reasons it can't do it is it's not absolutely in the same, if you like, dimension that we're in, and thus it cannot interact in the same way. That's why it has these bloodlines, which are basically its representatives in our, if you like, visible light 5-sense reality that are doing its bidding. It can't actually come in and just take over, or otherwise quite clearly it would have done. So then you start to think, well, how has it taken over? And this connection between the nature of reality and this force started to become obvious to me. And it does relate to this, if you like, virtual reality. As the movie explained, I talked about, we are interacting with what I call it cosmic Wi-Fi. It's the basic equivalent of a Wi-Fi field or fields. These are fields of information. And they are fields of possibility and probability and all the rest of it. And we are decoding information through the 5 senses from the basic, the basis of this reality is waveform information, again, like Wi-Fi. And the 5 senses decode the waveform into electrical information, which is communicated to the brain electrically, which then constructs this information from the senses into the world we think we are experiencing. Now, that is exactly the way we experience computer games and virtual reality. It's the same process. So, this world that we experience as outside of us is actually information. Just as when virtual reality games hack into that process with the headsets and stuff, it's another form of information which then overrides this information and we experience the virtual reality, which seems so real. And it became clear to me that what had happened, how this hijack had taken place, is that humanity was manipulated to start decoding a different source of information, thus reality, experience reality, than it was before. And when you go back to this common theme, again, right the way through the ancient world and ancient societies, of the gods manipulating human, what we would call human genetics, manipulating the human form. Now, when I first came across the realization of the ridiculously narrow band of frequency, visible light, that we can perceive and nothing beyond it, it was like, that's so tiny, it's crazy, man. But what if this genetic manipulation was actually a manipulation of the band of frequency that we can visually experience, which is far narrower than it was before this hijack took place? So basically, where I'm going with this is, it seems to me that what's happened is the equivalent, it's the equivalent of putting on the headset and the gloves and everything and suddenly experiencing a different reality. They've hijacked our decoding processes, so we are decoding a different form of information, and thus we are manifesting what is not the prime reality that we were experiencing before the hijack, but the reality of a virtual reality matrix. Now, this matrix operates within a certain band of frequency and not beyond it. And therefore, what they have to do, which connects into many other things that the movie talks about, they have to focus our attention within this band of frequency on which this fake information, this matrix operates, so that we are in the matrix and of the matrix in terms of the information we receive. So the only information we receive is coming from the matrix, this information source, and thus that becomes our entire perception. Now, this is why they work so hard to get us to self-identify with labels and not self-identify with the true self, which is a point of attention within infinite awareness. Potentially, it is infinite awareness itself if we open ourselves to maximum extent. Because when you focus on labels, when you self-identify with your name, your religion, your race, your income bracket, your life story, not as an experience, but as you and the totality of you, then that focus of attention, because everything is a frequency, different emotions are different frequencies, different states of perception are different frequencies, different states of self-identity are different frequencies. Therefore, if you can be manipulated to focus and self-identify with labels as you, then you are operating on a very narrow band of frequency because you have a narrow band of self-identity, and you're on a very low level of frequency. In other words, if you can be manipulated to self-identify with labels, then you are in the matrix and you're of the matrix. And the education system is all there preparing people, or the people that who do it don't know, but that which controls it and sets up the parameters of it, they know that the education system is there to prepare you to be a 5-sense perceiver, and only that, your entire lifetime. So what happens in terms of breaking out of the matrix? The matrix is actually a perceptual state. That's what it is. Once you change your self-identity from I am my labels to I am the consciousness having the experience called the labels, then you self-identify with the true I, and you, in that self-identity, expand your frequency state. As you expand your self-identity state, now you're breaching the walls of this matrix, which is nothing more than an information source that we're decoding into a perceived reality. And this is why they are terrified of people awakening. This is why they don't explore reality as it really is. They don't explore in the mainstream the nature of the I. This is why throughout history, shaman, visionaries who've been able to see and perceive beyond the bubble of 5-sense reality have been targeted by the authority of the day. This is what religion was about, to focus attention overwhelmingly. As little me. What does religion say? You are little me, and big God is not you. No, big God is big God, and you're little me. They don't want you to realize that what we call God, what we call infinite awareness, is who we are. Because that perception, that self-identity, will breach the perceptual walls of the matrix. It's what happened to me 30 years ago now. And what you then do, you're in the world because you are experiencing this reality through this body, which gives us the ability to interact. That's why I can hold this microphone. My consciousness couldn't, because it's on a completely different frequency. So you're in the world and experiencing it. But we're not of the world now. We are looking into this reality from a much more expanded level of perception. Our radar completely changes. Now, instead of seeing dots, you start to see pictures, because you're at that level of awareness that can do it. And the only difference between people who are doing that and people who aren't is their perceptual state. And that's why 24/7 our perceptual state is being programmed. A programmed little me. I've got no power. You're just a cosmic accident. Because that is necessary to hold us in this matrix. So while this force may seem to be all powerful, Oh, you know, what can we do? It's in a desperately tenuous position of power. A, because it has to manipulate us to build our own prison and to enslave each other, which is what divide and rule is all about, political correctness and all that. It's the target population enslaving itself. And it is absolutely dependent on people staying in a little me, I have no power, I am only my labels, perceptual state. So when people think, how do we break out of this control? I know, let's stockpile weapons. That's just the 5-sense reaction to a 5-sense illusion. You stockpile weapons, you start fighting, that's what they want. They want conflict. What is fighting? What is violence? It is nothing but a low perceptual state. That's what they want. What they don't want is people to remember the true I and to start self-identifying with that instead of self-identifying with the labels, because then the real revolution, a revolution of perception, a revolution of self-identity, will bring the walls of this nonsense down. It's the only thing that will.
I just want to say that was a question worthy of your time. Thank you. I think we have a question right here. Bunch of them will take that. Right here for
Wait, he's waiting for the microphone. When you get the microphone, it means that everyone else can hear the question. That would be great. Well, in fact, just take that one. Yeah. I'll go charge.
So 2 years ago, I had a sort of spiritual awakening of my own during a psychotic mushroom trip from hell, where I completely lost my mind for several hours, and I didn't know who I was. I didn't have a single thought of my own in my own mind. But in the middle of the trip, I had a thought that seemed to come from somewhere else. And that thought was, David Icke is right. Where it came from, I don't know who said it, but it led me here. And I guess my question for you is, how do you feel about mind-altering substances that can be used to awaken consciousness or expand awareness?
Okay. Well, I took him once. I only took him once, actually, for people who haven't come across the story. I was writing a book called Alice in Wonderland, The World Trade Center Disaster. It came out in 2002, obviously, about 9/11. And when I was writing that, I was saying to people, you know, if I'm going to understand more, I need to get out there. Not in some dream where you wake up and think, you know, was that real? But actually, in the conscious mind, I need to get out there and see what this reality is from another level of perception. And just after that synchronicity of my life, I got invited to the rainforest of Brazil, near Manaus, in northern Brazil, to partake of something called ayahuasca. Obviously, it's a perception-changing potion which comes from the rainforest. It tastes a bit like licorice. And I took it over a couple of nights, and particularly on the second night, it was great on the first night, but on the second night it was unbelievable. Because I went into a state of perception, it takes about an hour to kick in, and this voice, as loud as mine is now, started talking to me. It took a female form, and talked to me for about 5 hours about the nature of reality. It was bloody hilarious. It was so funny. I mean, you know, there's a lot of humour out there. The worst part about it was my belly was hurting from laughing. Because what it was doing, this voice, was describing the illusory nature of this reality. And how it's all an illusion. And I remember, you know, you're kind of interacting with it in terms of your mind. And it said at one point, everything's an illusion. And what I went to say in my mind, you mean everything. And before I got halfway through the sentence, the voice came back, everything is an illusion. So what happened then is I came back to England with full memory of this 5 hours, extraordinary, and all the main points of it anyway. And I started looking into mainstream science and the different disciplines, not least quantum physics and stuff like that. And I realized that if you put the dots together within mainstream science, they already have realized this is an illusion. This is a construct of consciousness, if you like, in the way I'm describing. But because the disciplines don't talk to each other, the dots don't connect, although it's much further along with quantum physics. But I've never felt to do it again, because what has happened to me since it started for me 30 years ago is my intuition kicks in, and when this says go, I go, and when it doesn't, I don't. And so I've never felt to do it. I really felt to do it that time. I've not felt to do it since. And what I feel is happening with psychoactive drugs, as they're called, is it's taking you to another level of yourself, another level of our consciousness. So it takes you to where you already are, but from another level of perception. So I know people that have taken the same thing I had a great bloody time on. It was very, very important for me to get this understanding of reality. But I know other people who've had really bad experiences on it. And I wouldn't say to anyone, take this or don't take that, because none of my bloody business. It's for people to decide for themselves. But for sure, once you've experienced it, you start to get, sometimes massively so, this understanding that the world of what we call human experience is just a tiny smear of what we actually are on all these different other levels of ourselves. So I had a very good experience. I know a lot of people have had a good experience and some people have had a bad experience. But if people feel to try it, then try it. And again, you look at these things, and even in Brazil, we had to do it with being led by a tribesperson, because it's allowed to be used, ayahuasca, in a tribal situation because it's perceived to be part of their religion. But if you do it without that, then it's illegal. And so many things are illegal that will open the door to you seeing that the world is not like we thought it was. Why? Because they don't want us to know that. They don't want us to know that. But so I had a great experience, and I wouldn't have missed that for anything, because it gave me an unbelievable insight into reality.
Yes, ma'am. Could you please talk about 5G?
Yes, 5G is part of this end game, and this brings me into a whole new, a big area of interconnected subjects, because it seems strange that I'm going to go from a question about 5G and I'm going to start talking about climate change, but they are connected in ways that I'll come to. I was a national spokesman for the Green Party in Britain a long time back, so I'm very interested in the environment and preserving the world that we live in, or what is the world we live in, but as we experience it. But this whole thing about climate change is a complete bloody hoax. It really is. And so people say, well, why would they do that? Well, I'll say why they would do that. What I said back in the 1990s was coming. If you want to centralize power globally, which is what they want, then you need an excuse to do it. So anything that could justify centralization of global power to meet the challenge of a global problem is good for your justification for centralization of global power. What I said in the 1990s is what this climate change is all about, caused by human activity, is they're going to come along and say we have to centralize power in the world to meet the challenge of the climate change and save the world. Now, we have now reached that point where, I don't know whether you know, but in Britain we've just had streets of London closed down by climate protesters from an organization called Extinction Rebellion.
New Green Deal.
And over here we've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, the New York Congresswoman, who's pushing this Green New Deal. Then you look at the United Nations agendas, known as Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, which are basically founded on meeting the challenge of climate change. And you look at the demands of Extinction Rebellion to the British government in the last 2 weeks, and they're mirrors of each other. And what they're saying is basically we need to transform human society, we need to centralize power to meet the challenge of climate change caused by human activity. And that is precisely what I said in the 90s was going to be the reason that they're flogging this hoax. And there's a very interesting article on davidicke.com today about CO2. I am coming back to 5G, by the way. There's a very good article about CO2, carbon dioxide, and what it is. And it just reveals the absolute nonsense of what's going on. In that without carbon dioxide, we'd all be dead. And there've been much higher levels, fantastically higher levels of carbon dioxide in what we call history, before industrialization. The temperature of the planet was significantly higher than today, 1,000 years ago, before industrialization. And whenever there has been periods of high carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, not that there's much anyway, really, but high by that comparison, there have been times of abundance. Because plants grow, flourish in a carbon dioxide-rich atmosphere. So, one side of global warming, as it once was called, until temperatures started to level out, now they call it climate change, is to justify centralization of power, which is what's now being pushed. Now, what the environmental movement is also supporting is this technological, what I call smart grid, which is dependent for its ultimate control state of 5G communication power or higher. They are pushing that as a way of fighting climate change. And, you know, someone with intelligence questioned this Extinction Rebellion organization in Britain. What is your view of 5G? And the response was, well, you know, we're not really bothered about discussing that because the real issue is climate change. But the whole, as in totality, they are seeing this technological revolution as a way of overcoming climate change. The irony is that 5G is in the band of frequency called millimeter waves, which are incredibly destructive, not just to humans, both psychologically and what we call physically, but also to animals, also to marine life, also to plant life and trees, because every expression of life is an energetic field. And what we call its physical expression is an outgrowth, if you like, a reflection of that energetic field. And anything that disrupts that field from its state of natural harmony is going to physically, in terms of humans and animals, psychologically change and disrupt people have become distorted and disrupted by it and imbalanced by it. So 5G, which the environmental movement is either supporting or thinking is not important, is going to have fundamental environmental consequences as well as human consequences. And I don't know if you've ever seen these pictures, sometimes moving, sometimes still pictures, of plants, exactly the same plant that has been grown in a high Wi-Fi atmosphere and one that has been grown in a no Wi-Fi environment. And one is flourishing and the other one is holding on for dear bloody life. This is what we're looking at. And when you think that within the same band of frequency as 5G, the American military have technological devices that scatter protests and scatter crowds, because they fire this frequency and it's decoded by the skin, which has been very clearly shown that the sweat ducts, etc., of the body and the skin are an antenna. It's what they are. It's what the body is. It's an antenna. That's what DNA is. DNA is a receiver-transmitter of information. That's what we're doing all the time, receiving and transmitting information. So what the skin does, and the sweat ducts do with this protest scattering technology within the 5G band, is it decodes it so that people feel that their skin is on fire. And what are they going to do when that happens? They're going to run until it's not on fire anymore. In other words, they're going to scatter to get out of this frequency. Now, because 5G doesn't travel well because of its frequency, instead of having big towers broadcasting this stuff over a long distance, it means having little boxes broadcasting this stuff down the street. And there's an interesting phenomenon in Britain, I don't know whether you've had it here, but certainly in Britain, whereby as they're moving towards the introduction of 5G, there is an absolute mass slaughter in Britain going on, particularly in one city called Sheffield. It's extraordinary, of mature urban trees. Beautiful trees down tree-lined roads. They're coming along, they're just cutting them down. Big massive protests about it. And they say, oh no, they're not healthy, they're dangerous, we've got to cut them. What, all of them? Like 8,000 in a city? And then you think, well, what would be the worst nightmare of 5G? Mature urban trees down the street, because it don't go through solid objects very well as it doesn't travel very far. And when you look at, there's an extraordinary, it's quite horrific really when you look at it, but if you go on the internet, you will see if you put in Communications Commission, the CFC, and Wheeler and 5G, Wheeler the name, 5G, you'll see a video, we've got quite a number of versions of it, of a guy called Wheeler. Now he was head of the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. And this guy just happened to be, in his previous job, before Obama gave him this job, one of the chief lobbyists for the telecommunications industry. Then he gets the job as head of the FCC, which is supposed to regulate and protect us from the telecommunications industry. And he's making this presentation, well, 2-3 years ago now, about 5G, and he's very open. He says, we're not going to do any testing. We're not going to have any regulation, because that will slow it all down. What we're going to do, is what he said, we're going to let the industry decide the safe levels, and not government, right? And then, about maybe a month ago, there were hearings on Capitol Hill in a Senate committee, and there was about 3, 4, 5 of these telecommunications industry giants representatives. And one senator, Senator Blumenthal, asked them, how much money have you spent on independent research into the effects on humans of 5G. And they said nothing, zero. And the reason they're not doing that, and the reason Wheeler said we're not having regulation, is because if there was independent research into the effect on humans of 5G, 5G would never come in. So they're just not having it. And this 5G is necessary. This is why they're pushing it on us, to connect this smart grid, which has been developed in a very systematic sequence, starting with the creation of the internet. Because the internet exists, was introduced by, as a result of, an organization I mentioned in the movie, DARPA. DARPA is the technological development arm of the Pentagon. On their own website, they claim we created the internet. And this has been the process. The internet was introduced by DARPA, which gives evil a bad name. I mean, I'd call DARPA evil, but I might get sued for defamation of character, you know, by evil. And the idea was to introduce the internet and to manipulate it to become the central pillar of human society to a point where it's irreversible. And to sell the internet and get that position, they had to let it be a free internet for a long time. So this is great, you know, you can communicate with anyone, you can say what you like, this is great, this is good, oh yeah, internet. Everyone starts using the internet. But the plan all along was that the internet was going to be the pillar of human control and of human censorship of the free discourse of information, which is what we're seeing now. Because once this point was reached, where the internet, which it is now, had become this central pillar of human society, in a situation that's basically irreversible, then once that had been reached, now we're going to make the internet what we planned from the start. So you've got all the censorship, etc. And the next stage, after the internet kind of settled down and became part of human society, was to go to the next stage, and that was what was called the Internet of Things. This is all connected to 5G. I'm coming round again back to that. Because it's kind of sobering to think how fast this is moving. Because it weren't that long ago that I was writing books warning about the coming of the Internet of Things, and now we're there, it's there. And what that is, of course, is that all this technology, everything from your car to your telly to your fridge to everything, smart meters, all part of this, is connected to the internet. And the idea is to go to the next stage, of which they have a name for, the Internet of Everything, in which the human mind will be connected to the internet. That's what this AI connection is all about. Now, the idea is that we will live in a grid of an information grid and a communication grid where everything is connected to the internet and everything is connected to AI, which means whoever controls AI controls everything. Now, to reach that point, that smart grid outcome, they have to have communicative power of the level of at least 5G, and you've got Trump now talking about 6G. 5G's just coming in, one of 6G. But this is what it's all about. It's about building this technological prison, and what it basically is, the smart grid, is it's almost another step down from the wider matrix I described earlier. And it's another level of perceptual control, which comes even closer to the human experience, whereby we are connected by an AI connection to AI, and AI then starts to do our thinking for us and becomes our perceptual state. And we can't do anything without the smart grid agrees that we can do it. So if we talk about information, the smart grid will decide what we see and what we don't see. This is what's happening now with Facebook and Google and Twitter and all the rest of it. They're using algorithms, AI, to censor without any human input. And the idea is to reach the point where this algorithmic control is so total that we literally don't see or hear anything, that the AI grid doesn't choose to allow us to see or hear. This is why they're targeting free speech, because free speech can challenge official narratives. Take free speech away, there's nothing to challenge official narratives. This is the end goal, and this is why we're seeing the stepping stones now getting faster and faster and faster. So the idea is to create this grid where the human mind, as we've come to understand it, ceases to exist, and only AI perceptions are dictating everything. And if they can't get 5G, they can't make it work, and that's why it's being pushed on us without any testing whatsoever.
So I told you he would be brief, right?
I did go through a few different subjects.
I know. Okay, so unfortunately our time is kind of running out, but I just want to throw one question in, David, that we got the other night in London that I thought was amazing. And the question was, what makes you hopeful for the future, and how can we be renegades? And then we're going to have to wrap it up.
Well, it's just a choice. You can choose to acquiesce, or you can choose to say, I'm not having it. You can choose to because the greatest form of censorship, the most insidious, powerful form of censorship is self-censorship. That's why this is why they're trying to intimidate people into silence by all this abuse and what have you, all this political correctness. It's about intimidating people into censoring themselves, so that the system doesn't have to do it, because we're doing it to ourselves. This is what it's all about. We can choose to acquiesce to that, or we can choose not to. And if you, again, take the big picture, we are a point of attention within infinite awareness. We are infinitely aware. We are an eternal consciousness exploring the infinity of forever. That's who we are. And when we leave this reality, we'll explore another one. Now, if you come from that big picture self-identity, then a few consequences in a tiny band of frequency called visible light don't really mean anything. So you start doing what you know to be right, instead of, like I said earlier, what are the consequences for me of doing it? Then you become a renegade. You become a renegade because you're now not acquiescing. And what is a renegade? It's someone who won't acquiesce. Simple as that. You can't say that. Well, watch me. So it's a choice, and it's a choice to overcome the fear of not making that choice to be a renegade. And I can tell you from my own experience, when I was a goalkeeper, the worst part of being a goalkeeper when I was a professional footballer was sitting in the dressing room waiting to go out and play, because all that could go wrong was going through your bloody head. And then you go out and play, and it was fine. All this could go wrong, that could go wrong. Well, oh my God, consequences. They all went, because you just did it. You played the game. And thinking about being a renegade is far more intimidating, I can tell you, than being one. Because once you take that leap, where I'm gonna do what I know to be right, and not do what I know not to be right because I fear the consequences of not acquiescing, that very statement, that very shift in perception from I will acquiesce to I will not acquiesce, that shifts your frequency. It expands your awareness, and you start to tap into levels of consciousness that suddenly start to manifest in your life as incredible synchronicity, what we call coincidence. So when you step into this arena of being a renegade, if you like, which is basically I'm not acquiescing, coincidences start to happen. They have to me for a long time, where the support you need to be what you've chosen to be starts to happen. You meet the right people, bits of luck happen. People like this say, let's make a movie, right? So this is what happens. And they don't happen if you stay in acquiescence, because acquiescence is little me, I've got no power. So that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, just as I'm infinite awareness is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's all about consciousness in the end. And the reason I'm hopeful is all those years ago, when it was just starting for me, in the wake of the Betty Shine experience, I started meeting a lot of psychics. I think Betty Shine was the only one I chose to go to. But after that, I kept bumping into professional psychics. And I'd say to people, what do you do? They'd say, I'm a psychic. I thought, not a bloody another one. And they would started to give me this very clear pattern of information, because I'm blinking into the headlights of the oncoming, what the hell's going on in my life at the time, trying to make sense of it. And there was a very clear theme, and it was this, that there is a transformation coming. What I would call now a frequency information transformation. That, what I was told 30 years ago, is going to act like a spiritual alarm clock for humanity. Humanity was in an induced coma, and this vibrational change was going to start teasing people awake. And those that were less in the coma were going to be affected first, but eventually more and more people deep in the coma were going to be affected. Now, 30 years ago, when I was told this, I can tell you there was no evidence that this was happening at all, that anyone was awakening to anything. But when I look now from the perspective of 30 years later, it is happening. It's not the television news, no it's not, and it won't be. They don't want to talk about that. But as I travel around the world, I'm seeing this openness, this questioning, this, well, you know, what is life about? Maybe it's not what I thought it was. And as the world moves on down this agenda road, people are starting to get uneasy about it, what's happening, so they become more open to explanations of what's happening. And I gave the name to this vibrational change way back in 1991, Truth Vibrations. That's why that book is called Truth Vibrations. Because this was something else that I was told 30 years ago in this sequence with these psychics. That this vibrational change was going to have the effect of bringing to the surface all that had been hidden from us. Where we would see what we hadn't seen before. We would see what had been running human society that we hadn't seen. Now, again, 30 years ago, 1990, when this was told to me, there was no evidence of that whatsoever. But look now at what we know about the manipulation of human society that we did not know 30 years ago, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So this truth vibrations phenomenon that I was told about is happening. No, it's not as fast as we would like it, no, but it's happening. I tell you it's happening. And so there was nothing in those communications that said, basically, you're stuffed, ladies and gentlemen, all the best. You'll have to live with it because nothing's changing. No, there was nothing that said that. It was all about the transformation of human perception becoming the transformation of human society, because human perception is human society. And I've never lost that. Not even hope, because hope's a waste of time. Yes. Hope's always in the future. Hope's like sitting on a carousel horse trying to catch the one in front. You know, hope's always in the future, isn't it? I hope in the future. I know is in the now. I know that what appears to be a lost cause now isn't. And how fast it isn't is dictated by how fast people choose to be renegades of normality and thus change normality. that's going to dictate the speed of it. But the reason I'll finish with this, the reason they're racing now to lock down human perception through AI and shut down all these sources of other information, on one level you can see it as arrogant, we're in control, we'll decide, but I see it on another level. I see panic. I see panic. They are absolutely aware that this awakening is happening, and it's starting to challenge their narrative, it's starting to challenge their program, and they're trying to shut it down. Whether they do that is our choice. 7.7 billion against a relative handful. I think I see a way out of this. And it's time we took it.
Guys, I just want to thank you so much for coming out. I want to announce for the first time that pre-orders for Renegade are coming out tomorrow. And I hope that you guys will share it with your friends, and we really hope that this transformation that David is talking about, that this can be a tool for that to happen. So we'll stick around for a couple minutes to chat with you one-on-one. But again, thank you so much for supporting the film. Thank you so much for
One of the things with the pre-orders, the download, which will be available on the 4th of June, there's going to be a pack of other things because we shot so much. Fantastic stuff that couldn't get in the movie. That will all be available too.
There's over 2 hours of bonus material with extra interview stuff with David, with Alice Walker, and with Ivan Pernar, the Croatian MP. So there's over 2 hours of bonus stuff that's not in the movie. There was no way we could make it unless we made a mini-series. And so hopefully it could be next step. So anyways, I hope you guys really enjoy it. Thanks again, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming. It's appreciated. Thank you.